Hello and welcome to the Healthy for Men podumentary series. My name's Tom Rowley, editor of Holland & Barrett's Healthy for Men magazine. And in this episode, we're talking all things sex, and more specifically, how to have a positive sexual relationship. Our guest today is sex educator and journalist Alix Fox. Alix has been the news editor for Bazaar magazine. She has her own podcast with the explicit title Unexpected Fluids, and she's also a script advisor for the fantastic Netflix show Sex Education. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome to the Healthy for Men podcast. Today we are here with Alix Fox, the journalist and sex educator. Alix, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. I am indeed Alix Fox, a name that quite conveniently rhymes with Phallic Cox, which is fitting for someone that spends a lot of their days talking about the gentle and not so gentle things that people do with their genitals. So
let's talk a little bit about your career, Alix. So how did you... you started off as a journalist, didn't you? And what was your first gig?
My first big gig was working for a magazine called Bazaar. That's Bizarre with an I, not Bazaar with an A. One of them is an alternative culture magazine, or was an alternative culture magazine. I'm afraid it's gone to that big printing press in the sky now. It was the world's biggest alternative culture magazine. It covered all the kind of like weirder, wilder, more wonderful side of sex and of music and of art. And one of my specialisms there was writing about unusual kinks and fetishes. So I tried underwater bondage. I got dressed up as a mermaid and waded to the bottom of a swimming pool at a swingers resort and tied up by an expert in Japanese shibari called S&M.
Wow.
I also spoke to people who had... non-standard, shall we say, fetishes for smells. I'm talking things that to most people would be repellent and repugnant, like the smell of vomit or of bleach. And through this work, I got really interested in the psychology of how people had come to develop these particular kinks and what their own philosophies were on where they thought they stemmed from and what it was about those things that was so compelling and so enchanting to those folks. And it also struck me that there was a heck of a lot of stigma and taboo about talking about things that gave people pleasure and excitement. And when I dug into a lot of them, I found that even though they might seem quite shocking externally to most people, actually they weren't really doing any harm. The ways in which they could do harm is if they weren't spoken about or if things were entered into without knowing about safety. So I started to get kind of idea that maybe there might be a niche in the market for someone to speak more frankly and honestly about that in a way that made it more palatable and acceptable. And then, right on cue, 50 Shades of Grey came along, Tom.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, not a perfect trilogy of books.
No, not perfectly written. However, probably did great for the conversation about S&M.
Yeah, you're entirely right. A lot of aspects of the S&M relationship portrayed in those books and those films is actually not very healthy at all. And a lot of people in the BDSM community were quite concerned about the messages that were being given off to the general public about what was a good kind of thing to enter into. Not only physically, but emotionally, there were red flags. So many red flags that it looked like bunting, you know. But I can't deny that it did start a lot of constructive conversations and move something which had previously been viewed as maybe even pathological or weird or perverse into the mainstream. On a personal level for me as well, it meant that something that I had become quite specialised in doing on a relatively small level, writing for a popular but still quite cult magazine, suddenly was in demand from much bigger platforms like the BBC and The Guardian. And whilst it was a pleasure to suddenly be in demand, I had a consciousness that I was trying to do my best to be a good journalist and research the things that I was writing about and give good answers to the people who then started to approach me for personal advice. but I hadn't had any training on safeguarding. I didn't know what to look out for that might give me a clue that somebody from the public who was approaching me with a question might be at risk, or maybe the aspects of potential trauma that I needed to be aware of. So I actually did some training with a young people's sexual wellbeing charity that I'm now an ambassador for, called Brooke.
So what are they called?
Brooke. Yeah, Brooke have been going for many years. I remembered reading columns that representatives from Brooke wrote in magazines like Sugar and Just 17 when I was younger. So they were the first name that sprung to mind when I thought, I need a bit of advice on how to navigate not just being a journalist, but more of a sexual expert here, more of someone that people come to for advice. At the time, although I had a lot of work coming in from this suddenly popular topic, lots of people were asking me about rubbing their parts together, but I didn't really have very many coppers to rub together. So I didn't have the cash as a young freelance journalist to invest in training. So I offered them a deal and said, look, I'll help you get some press if you wouldn't mind me coming along and listening to some of your workshops. And they agreed, and they trained me in things like how to advise on contraception to young people, what to be aware of if someone's in a position where they're experiencing an unwanted pregnancy, the realities of terminations, all sorts of really useful topics, and gave me a grounding to help me do my job in a more responsible manner. And then, as you say, it's taken off like a NASA rocket from there on.
Wonderful. So, I mean, from listening to you talk about this, your job really is about compassion, isn't it? It's about understanding and empathising. Like most journalists, that's to a degree part of a journalist's job. But yours, more than the most, I would say, is about understanding other people, how they feel about quite unusual things.
I always say that my job combines passion with compassion. And I think the best love lives do too. It's not just about learning skills and being excited and enthusiastic about what you're doing, but certainly in partnered sex, but also when you're dealing with your own body. It's about being kind and thoughtful about yourself, and being kind and thoughtful towards anybody that you're having a sexual experience for. That's a damn good foundation for a damn good time.
Absolutely, it sounds it. Which is amazing. It's incredible when you put it like that, because people worry so much about how they should be and how they should act in sexual situations, and how to build a better sexual relationship. And I imagine they focus so much more on what they're doing rather than that ability to empathise with whoever they're with. And
there are a lot of misconceptions about what good sex should look like. I now work for BBC Radio 1 as one of the many jobs I do. I always say that I'm spread thinner than a miser's marmite. I'm doing a lot at the moment, but it's good. I like to be busy and buzzy. And trust me, I have enough sex toys in my collection that I'm permanently buzzing, like a beehive on fire. I work for BBC Radio 1 doing a show called Unexpected Fluids, which is where we share real life tales of sexual fails. In a very compassionate way. We all have a laugh together about how often sex isn't that glossy, polished, sultry, sumptuous, sensual experience that we might get the impression it ought to be from films and TV. Often it's two people trying to fudge and faff something together that they may not have an entirely great idea of what it is that they're doing. Bits of bodies bump and bang, things fall on people's heads. We're all kind of fumbling and tumbling and jumbling our way through sex a lot. And that sometimes means that, sadly, it can go wrong. So we use those comical situations as a way of reassuring people that if your sex life isn't perfectly polished, then that is normal. And also then use that as a springboard for talking about how we can all make things a little better.
Fantastic, and a wonderful portrayal of your description of what sex is in reality is, of course, sex education.
Oh, the TV show.
The TV show, which is one of the best things I've ever seen on Netflix.
I'm blushing now. My cheeks are going to be redder than my lipstick and my bank balance.
And I think it's really important for young, really young people to watch that show. It's got such a good heart. It's so warm, and it's such an honest portrayal of what sex is for especially for teenagers as well. I think a lot more younger people should watch it. Kids, to get a more realistic view and a heartwarming and compassionate view of sexual relationships. So your position on sex education is
doggy.
I felt that coming.
So did I, Tom. So did I.
Your role in is that any better? Don't know.
Everything's an innuendo. Trust me, I've learned this after over a decade and a half of working within sex education. I've learned that there's nothing that you can say that cannot be interpreted in some kind of mucky fashion.
I'm starting to learn that myself. So your role, let's go with that, is to review the scripts, make them perhaps more progressive, more contemporary, more honest about sexuality, would you say?
Yeah, I'm a script consultant. So in the first season, I was brought on to meet all of the writers, which was, oh, wow, I was so stoked. I was really chuffed to be involved in it. Such a great project. And they wanted to get some advice from me on the kind of dilemmas that young people commonly face, the questions that they have, the language that they use, because if a show like that was using naff, out-of-date terminology, then it would immediately relegate it to the realms of something that adults had made that was trying to be too cool for kids and had fallen flat on its face. But equally, it's not a show that tries to be too edgy either. So we were trying to strike the balance there with the terminology that we used. And also from the point of view of Jean, who is the sex therapist mother, they wanted to ask me some questions about what her job would look like.
So this is Gillian Anderson.
Yeah. If for anybody listening who hasn't watched Sex Education, the premise of the show is that there's a young guy called Otis who's in his mid-teens, and his mum, played by Gillian Anderson, is a sex therapist. His bedroom is over her therapy room, and by dint of sleeping there and just generally sharing a home with her, he inadvertently picks up a lot of quite adult sex education. He's very, very well qualified in knowing the bare bones about boners and some more. What Otis lacks, though, is real life experience. In fact, he is so overexposed to sex stuff through his mum that at the beginning of the show, he actually wonders that he might be asexual. He just associates things like intercourse with his mother, and that's understandably rather off-putting for him.
Blimey, yeah. What a situation.
But his mates at school clock one day that he has this enormous repository of knowledge, which is hugely in demand. All teenagers want to know more about sex, whether they're getting it, whether they're not, whether they're getting the hang of it, or whether it's going wrong. They all crave that kind of info, and they all have questions.
That's an amazing premise, isn't it? Well, such a great premise.
It's great, yeah. So he starts giving advice in the toilets. My role now for season 2, I've got a little bit of a promotion. Woohoo! I am now sent the scripts in batches to actually advise on the storyline and come up with some of the jokes and insert some lines there.
Wow.
So I'm starting to shape the story.
So with the first season, it's more sort of minor things you changed in the first season that would perhaps make it look out of date. I think I read that there was going to be a situation with porn magazines. So
the first scene was going to have a bottle of lotion and some crumpled up Kleenex, and the suggestion was that there would be a load of Playboy magazines. From my work with young people, I know that pretty much none of them in this day and age access porn through magazines. It's no longer the case that they're finding dirty rags in the bushes, Instead, they're using their phones and laptops to look at porn on the internet. And that observation was actually incorporated within the script. So now later on, Gillian Anderson's character does say, it was a little bit of a giveaway that you put those old Playboys from my collection there. There was also a lovely line about somebody shagging a watermelon, which definitely came from my experiences with young people, not myself.
Fantastic. So from doing all the work that you do, and you must see quite a fantastic and inspiring change in the attitude towards sex and sexual experience. Do you think, obviously we've probably got a lot of work to do in the stigma of fetishes and that kind of thing, but do you see a positive development in the world of sex?
There is so much to be cheerful about and heartened by in the world of sex at the moment. I do think that there is a change taking place in attitudes. I think it's in line with things like the push towards gender equality. I think and LGBTQ rights. I think we're generally becoming more open-minded and more accepting, and people are also recognising that there are huge gaps in sexual knowledge and that not talking about things does not improve matters. I'm involved via my work with Brooke with trying to campaign for better sex education in schools. It has been ruled now that sex ed will become compulsory in all schools across England from September 2020. Unfortunately, that date has already been pushed back a number of times. And ostensibly, that's a real win. But in order for that sex education to actually perform its duty, it needs to be answering the genuine questions that young people want to know the answers to. And as part of that, I'm working with Brooke to try and make suggestions of what should be on that curriculum. Top of our list is pleasure. Now, I don't want to demonise teachers at all, because a lot of people complain and say, well, the only sex ed that I got in schools taught me how not to get pregnant and how not to get an STI. And that was that. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, lesson over. However, teachers are under an enormous amount of pressure to try and fit a huge amount of education into a very short day. They have to hit all sorts of targets and reach goals with dwindling budgets. Lots of them aren't given the resources they need to teach sex ed well. They might have their own beliefs. They might have their own sexual traumas or bad experiences that they're dealing with. They might feel embarrassed about delivering that education. So I think they're up against a lot. And I also think that even if you do make sex education in educational establishments really brilliant, there will always be young people who don't engage with it, either because they feel disenfranchised from the school system, and it doesn't matter what you say and how great it is, they've already decided that teachers don't understand their lives and that they've tuned out.
It's a minefield for a lot of people, isn't it? For teachers and students alike. And I'd imagine there's a lot of parents and communities that are pushing against it as well. So there's a lot of conflict there. And
sadly so. What I always say is that trying to brush conversations about your hairy bits and your carpets down below under the carpet never actually helped anyone. But there are a lot of parents who worry that by talking about sex, you will stop children being children, or you'll take away their innocence, or you will over-sexualise them, or even encourage them to be physical. However, they live in a very over-sexualised world. They're receiving messages and misinformation about sex and sexual matters every day from films and TV and their peers and urban myths, and it's all around them. And also they will naturally have questions within their own heads. I would much rather that young people feel that they have people that they can go to who are reliable and who will give them good information in age-appropriate ways. And also that actually does help to protect their childhood. If, for example, you teach a younger child the proper names for their genitals and teach them that even though they might have discovered that touching themselves might feel good, that's something they need to do in private, and that nobody else should touch them in that way, that they are the boss of their own body. Having that conversation gently with them at home as a parent or a caregiver or as a youth worker, for example, helps protect them against potential abusive situations or manipulation or coercion. We know that knowledge is power. If you equip young people with good knowledge, you give them the power to make good decisions according to their own needs at their own pace. So I really believe that education isn't over-sexualisation, it's protection. We owe it to young people to do that. But going back to your question about whether I think things are moving in a positive manner, In some ways, absolutely yes. But I'm also really aware that I am stuck in a bit of a sex ed bubble. So if I go on Instagram or Twitter, I see all these brilliant movements towards like people drawing realistic diagrams of vulvas so they know what their flaps look like and how much frilliness is normal and what have you. Or I see amazing movements like Bloody Good Periods, who are a charity who talk about menstrual poverty and how some people don't have access to stuff like tampons or sanitary towels, and it severely impacts upon their lives and their ability to go to school or to jobs, things like that. All of that's really progressive, but that is not reaching everybody. And then I go into schools, or just recently I've just wrapped filming a new show for Channel 4 called The Sex Clinic. It's the second season of that, where people drop into Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital, where we've set up a specialist STI testing service and advice clinic. And they come to see me to ask whatever's on their mind about their behinds or their front bottoms. And I have seen in the past few days 27-year-olds who didn't know that women don't give birth and wee through the same through different holes. They thought they did that through the same hole. Wow. That there are still like real basic issues of lack of knowledge. So even though I think it's great that things definitely are moving forward, we need to make sure that we are including everybody in that march and that we're being diverse, accessible and inclusive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I completely agree. So we're speaking now to probably a predominantly male audience. Do you think that that male attitudes have further to go than women, or in a different way, do you think that male attitudes need to develop and change about sex?
I think we should all be learning together a little bit more than we are. Lots of the topics where men's knowledge falls down is about women's desires and women's bodies. I think whilst traditionally in schools at the moment, men or male-defining children are sent out of the classroom when it's the talk about periods. I feel like they should be in the classroom for that. They need to know how women's bodies work, especially if they're going to enter heterosexual relationships. I hear from so many men who have no idea about their partner's monthly cycle. They don't understand anything about the contraception that she might be using. And in the majority, the responsibility for contraception falls to women. And we can have a very interesting conversation about that if you want. There are drives to develop some really intriguing forms of male contraception at the moment. It's certain that the history of contraception does definitely have a bit of a sexist angle. And a lot of women are angry that they tend to be the ones that have to endure the burden, if you want to.
It's a huge responsibility,
if you want to frame it that way, of having a coil fitted or taking the contraceptive pill every day or what have you. However, it's also, I think, really important to realise that women are the ones who fall pregnant, and so a lot of them actually feel quite empowered by being the ones to take that into their own hands, if you will. And also, women on average produce an egg once every 28 days or so, whereas men produce thousands upon thousands of sperm every day. So you've got more to work with in male bodies. There are a few really interesting developments cooking up on the back burner at the moment, though. They're probably realistically at least a decade from coming to market. But
so the male pill had a bit of a lease of life recently, did it? And it just wasn't a success, or is it now it's in development, but it might not actually work? Is that the case?
There was a male pill trialled. Unfortunately, it showed side effects, including depression, that were deemed too worrisome to continue with further trials.
Is that not the same for the female pill, which they've...
This is a hotly debated topic, yes. However, I hope that if female pills were trialled nowadays, they would be trialled to more compassionate and more stringent levels of... I think it's important to remember that the first female pills were developed quite a few decades ago now. And I think in order for a pill to be deemed safe and successful nowadays, the levels to which we'd expect it to be relatively pleasant to use and indeed safe would probably be a lot more stringent, a lot higher. So right. I think the way that we trial medication these days is different. There are some other contraceptives being trialled for guys. There's a hormonal gel that you apply to your back before sex that reduces the levels of sex hormones in the body, but then replaces them with others. I don't want to get really into the chemistry of it because it's quite complex, but basically they block the hormones from working that produce sperm, but then because those hormones also do other jobs in the body, they replace them to a degree that allows the rest of the body to function well, but suppresses fertility temporarily. Right. And that's being trialled. There's also something called vasal gel, or there's a number of gels that are being developed that rather than mucking around with hormones, they offer an internal form of block. They essentially work like a temporary vasectomy. Right. So it's a polymer gel that's that's injected into the vas deferens, which is the tube that essentially takes sperm and mixes it with the other components of semen before it's ejaculated. And this polymer gel is injected in there, so it blocks the duct. Don't worry, your balls aren't going to inflate with 10 tons of sperm. It just gets anything that doesn't get used in a day is naturally just reabsorbed
I'm sure that's
by the body.
Everyone's fear right now.
It's the same as if you didn't masturbate for a while, for example.
Right, okay.
So there's no worry, nothing to be afraid of there.
Okay.
And what's interesting about it is that gel can then be relatively quickly and easily reversed via either a second injection to flush it out or a form of microwave. And I know that it's a lot less of an invasive procedure than a traditional vasectomy, and it's much more easily reversed. So there's things in the pipeline for men's pipes. They're just a long way off.
Well, that's good. That's
being
good.
Ready just yet.
Yeah. The question would be then, I know this is a very complex debate, but is it right that men have control over the contraception, and maybe it should be more the women that have the contraception? I don't know, but it's an interesting philosophical debate, I suppose, about ethics.
Do you know what? Well, there was actually a survey conducted recently that asked women whether they trust a man to take a contraceptive pill, and only 32% of women said that they would feel confident that their male partner would do that. 68% of them, that means, just wouldn't. A man taking pills wouldn't give them thrills.
I can imagine. Yeah. Yeah, and I would probably feel the same if I was a woman. I'd want to take that control.
There are some women who even don't feel confident asking a man to use a traditional condom and have started to use what we used to call femidoms and now call internal condoms. I like the term vagina liner because that's kind of how they work. Have you ever seen a femidom?
I have seen a femidom, yeah, not in the flesh, but I'm aware of it. It's just a big condom, right? It's
pretty much, yeah. It looks like, you can get those little snack pots of Pringles.
Yes.
It's about the same diameter and length as one of those, but made out of usually nitrile or another kind of flexible plastic. So it looks like a hollow cylinder. It has one ring that's fixed that goes on the outside of the body and helps it to sit in place. And it has a second internal ring that you squeeze together, insert it a little bit like you would a tampon, and then it pops up and sits over the cervix. When you go to festivals and you've got those single person tents that you just throw and they pop up? It works a little bit like that, although Brilliant. It's thankfully easier to get down and get it out again. But yeah, they essentially line the vaginal canal. That's another word that I really love because I imagine narrow boats kind of going up and down by.
It's very picturesque, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They line the vaginal canal. You do have to be a little bit careful when you're using them during intercourse to make sure that the guy or the person using a toy, because you can use them with strap-ons or dildos or whatever as well to help protect you from STIs that way. You have to aim for the centre of the condom. If you actually accidentally slide down the side, then they're not going to do their job. But they actually offer a greater protection, slightly increased protection against STIs than standard condoms that go on a penis, because they cover a greater surface area of skin.
Oh, wow.
And women can insert themselves up to 8 hours before they want to have sex, which means that they acclimatise to body temperature and can feel a little bit more natural. But it also means that women can wear the condoms. And a lot of them feel like that they feel very empowered by that they can use their own barrier methods of contraception.
I can imagine, because the big debate has obviously been, well, it's been in the media a lot recently about the amount of men who have lied about wearing a condom or taking off a condom, which is obviously a horrible thing.
It's an illegal thing now.
An illegal thing to do,
it's
yes.
called stealthing. If you agree to wear a condom and your partner believes that you're wearing a condom, and you either lie about it or you take it off halfway through a sex act, then you have violated consent and you can be done for sexual assault.
Wow. There we go.
And rightly so.
Absolutely.
We've gone down a dark corner here, haven't we? Yeah.
Well, let's stir it back into something a little bit more light. So what do you think is a positive, this is a broad question, I apologise. What do you think is a positive sexual relationship? What defines that?
Oh, wow. That is broad. Okay. I think a positive sexual relationship is one where there's plenty of really good communication. And you know what? This is a bit of a bugbear of mine, because I think loads of sexperts, or I prefer the term sexpert, I think it's more dynamic. Lots of sexperts are really famous for going, communication is essential for a good relationship and a good sex life. But then they don't tell you how to communicate.
Yeah.
I find it very aggravating. We all know that talking is good, but lots of us don't know how to broach those awkward, cringy subjects, or we do worry that maybe if we express a desire to our partner that they might be offended and think that they weren't doing it right beforehand, or maybe it won't be their cup of tea and so they'll decide that they're not going to make us a cup of coffee in the morning ever again, and actually they want us to leave their beds permanently. You know, there's a lot of jeopardy and trepidation about talking about sex.
Yeah.
So just saying, oh, you need to talk about it isn't really good enough. There are lots of people trying to make that better. There are apps these days where you and your partner, for example, can both, you'll be presented with a series of sexual scenarios or acts or ideas of things to do, and you can say whether you'd be interested, you're definitely into it, or you're definitely not. And the app will only communicate to your partner the ones that you've both said that maybe you're definitely into or that you're intrigued by.
Wow,
so that's one
okay.
thing. There's also another app called Ferly, Ferly, which is designed for women at the moment, although I'd love to see something for men along these lines. So Ferly is an app that encourages women to become more mindful about sex and masturbation, and more in touch literally with their own bodies and discover what is pleasurable to them, but also helps them to communicate better about that. And I try to illustrate techniques of communication. Have you heard about sex menus, for example?
I have not heard about sex menus.
Sex menus are the order of the day, as far as I'm concerned. They involve you and your partner sitting down and making a list of all the kinds of things that you like, the sorts of things that you want to try. There are all sorts that you can download for free or otherwise for just, a couple of pounds on the internet. There's a really good one that's been published about how to make your own sex menu or manual by a couple of great sex educators called Justin Hancock. I mean, there's nominative determinism at its best, and Meg John Barker. But yeah, sex menus involve really thinking about what is it that you get from sex? What is it that you want? And then spelling that out for your partner in really constructive ways. I also like a technique called the care, air, share technique. So if there's something on your mind about sex, maybe something you're worried about or something that you'd like to suggest, then first of all, you tell your partner that you care about them. You might say something like, I feel so secure in this relationship, or I'm having so much fun with you, or, I always feel like I can talk to you about things. So you're opening the conversation in a positive way. They don't feel like they're about to get in some kind of terrifying trouble. Then you air what's on your mind. But I've noticed lately that we're both really tired, or you're working very long hours and we're not spending a lot of time together that's intimate, or hey, it feels like you've had a bit of trouble getting it up lately. I want to know how I can support you with that. And then finally, you invite them to share their thoughts on it. Oh, what do you think we could do together? Or is there something that we both need to find out? Should we go and get some information from our GP? Or how do you feel about trying this? What are your ideas? So you're inviting a collaborative you're inviting them to have a collaborative conversation with you. You're approaching it as a twosome. It's not you just making demands and giving commands. And I think that taking that approach to sex and having chats about it is a lot more of a helpful one than blurting out the thing that you have been concerned about for ages in a way.
Let's do this.
Yeah. You've been up king. I've also just started working with two women who have founded their own company. They're both in long-term relationships, really happy with their sex lives, totally attracted to their fiancés, but sort of got the feeling that things maybe weren't quite as spicy, or might be the rutting might have been getting stuck in a rut, if you will.
Right.
And they were looking for strategies to introduce new ideas over the long term in ways that were kind and exciting for both partners, rather than that worry of saying to someone, I want to try something new, and the implication being you're boring or you're a dud in bed. So they have started producing sex subscription boxes called The Sway. They cost about £35, I think.
What's it going to be?
Yeah, exactly. It's a box that's delivered to your door, thankfully in discreet packaging. It's not got, like a massive glittery knob drawn on the front, or contains 17,000 gigantic sex toys the size of bollards.
For those who can't see, it's a very, I suppose it looks like a perfume box or some nice gift box, pink and very discreet and very classy.
I'm glad you've said that. I mean, if I open it up, even the tissue paper inside is very beautiful.
It is, yeah.
That belies the fact that one of the women has a history of being involved in graphic design, and she's made it very graphic now.
Oh, wow.
But that's one thing that I do like about these sex subscription boxes. They look lovely. They look inviting and luxurious and classy. Well, not only do Sway boxes have really genuinely good stuff in, like this one that I've just opened has a sex toy that's sort of horseshoe shaped, that's designed to be worn vaginally and then sit on the clitoris, so where it offers stimulation, and it can actually be worn intercourse. If I open up another one here, what's inside? It's like family planning fortunes. This one's got a massage candle. These candles burn at a lower temperature than standard household candles, so they become liquid when they're warm rather than when they're super, super hot. Okay. And that means that you can essentially drizzle and dribble them all over your partner without needing to call a fireman and an ambulance afterwards. And they often have a nice scent, and you can use them, use them as massage oil. What else do we have in here? A waterproof tiny vibrator from a Japanese company called Eroa, who they and their male counterparts, Tenga, are really famous for making sex toys that don't look like genitals. They more look like maybe something that you'd buy at the Apple store, the Fapple store, if you will. These boxes come along to your door directly with all sorts of interesting, classy goodies, giving you a perfect opportunity and excuse to experiment. But even better, each one comes with a variety of little cards that are actually designed to start conversations and help you discuss in a constructive way what you want to do with your partner with the stuff that's in there. So
excellent. Okay.
There's a little card here that invites you to think about what it would be hot to do tonight, and then leave that for your partner somewhere that they can find it, and kind of take that on in their own time and contemplate it in their own space. a lot of conversations about sex are better off had outside the bedroom. For a start, because I think if you talk about sex over a cuppa in the kitchen or somewhere where, it's more of a casual, relaxed environment, then you're more likely to speak about it in a way that isn't overly emotional and stressful. You're calm and chilled. And also, if a conversation does become quite fraught, bringing that toxicity into the bedroom is then likely to be, you're likely to remember that stress the last time, the next time that you go to try and initiate sex.
So that place becomes a place of toxicity, doesn't it?
Exactly. You can kind of pollute your bedroom by talking about difficult matters into it.
That's really interesting.
I really recognise that this is a privileged thing to say, because not everybody can afford to live in homes where they have lots of different rooms. But I personally try and keep my bedroom just for sex and sleeping and pleasure and relaxation. I have a pact with myself that I wank in there, but I don't work in there.
Right.
And I have sex in there, but I don't talk about sex in there. Unless, of course, Tom, I'm talking about sex in a very erotic way that's designed to be a come on rather than a come on, we need to sort this out.
That totally makes sense. Absolutely. So, I mean, that's amazing. That's incredible. I think that's a really progressive thing. And I never thought that would... I mean, it makes sense now, doesn't it? A subscription box designed to increase communication and spice things up without having that awkward conversation of, I'm bored.
Yeah.
So is there any other ways that men can talk about sex? What about fetishes? I mean, if a man has a fetish, how should they talk about it with their partner?
I think a lot of guys and girls get understandably nervous and they quake and shake in all the worst ways about the idea of bringing up a fetish, because they worry that if their partner is revolted by it, that will have a really negative impact upon their relationship. Lots of people tell me that they actually find it easier to exhibit or suggest some kind of fetishistic behaviour in a casual sex encounter, because the stakes are lower. If somebody reacts in a way where they go, oh my God, pretending to be ponies on the hoof while we're getting it on is just that's disgusting and I never want to see you again. Then they can exit stage left from that one night stand without having done too much damage. But trying to bring something like that up with a long-term partner can be really, really scary.
Yeah.
One way that I think is maybe a gentler way to bring this up is to try and craft an erotic story together. I've brought along some dice, which I'm going to hand over to you, Tom.
I've got the dice.
Roll the first one for me. These are designed to help you navigate the process of writing erotica together. Okay, so this first one is a sexual position dice. So you can see here it suggests, or die, I should say, although die is a terrible word to associate with sex unless you're into necrophilia, which is not legal. So maybe don't suggest that one to your partner. They really will bolt for the door, or likely anyway. So this is about sex standing up. Okay, so you have to incorporate that into your story. Roll the next one.
Okay. Standing sex with...
Oh, this one is a props dice, and it's given us a laptop, okay? So you're going to incorporate technology within your story. Now, if you're somebody who's thinking, oh, I've got this fetish, maybe your aspect of the story could be, well, I came across this porn that was showing me this thing, or I was watching a TV program where there was a scenario that had this scene in it that excited me. If your partner reacts in a way that's maybe not very enthusiastic, you can say, oh, I was just using my imagination for the story. You might want to write those stories together. You might want to write them separately and then swap them. Erotica, like testing the waters by suggesting a piece of erotica to somebody, can be a really good way of gauging what their reaction to something might be.
So you're creating a safe space, really, for these kind of conversations to happen.
Exactly, yeah. I think as well, if you are somebody who is fixated on something that in private you've been getting off to the idea about for a long time, it's worth going in gently. Think about entry-level activities. So if you're thinking about bondage, for example, rather than suggesting that your partner suspend you in a net like a giant satsuma from the ceiling, with loads of ropes and whatever, maybe you suggest a pair of soft Velcro handcuffs for a start. They're easy to get out of. Or if you're thinking about pain, for example, and in your head you think you'd really like to be whipped or to whip somebody with a giant riding crop, start off with your hand so that you can, so you get some feedback straight away. You can feel how hard you're hitting, and it's maybe less intimidating than bringing a prop in. Going in gently works for a variety of reasons. For a start, that's less likely to be terrifying or intimidating to your partner. Secondly, it's really vital to remember, even if something really turns you on when you're watching it in porn is not the same as real life. And something that you've seen on screen that makes you feel very excited might actually be very, very different in real life. So the same way that if you were learning to swim, you would not dive into the deep end, stick your toe in the shallow end first and invite your partner to do the same. Start shallow and then get deep, which is also a great sex move if you're into penetration.
Absolutely. Work your way up to the satsuma.
Yeah,
situation.
And do your homework. Definitely do your homework. A lot of aspects of fetish do involve some level of risk. Not all, but if we're talking about things like spanking, for example. Amongst the fetish community, there's a motto that everything needs to be safe, sane and consensual, or some people refer to this under the wider moniker of risk-aware kink. Safe means that you have done your research to make sure that you know what you're doing, you're using the right equipment, you've not gone down B&Q for your S&M supplies and you're about to cable tie somebody in a way that means that they can't escape. You have established a safe word. That's a word that if you say it or if your partner says it in the middle of sex, it means that everything stops straight away. It's important to choose a word that you would never usually say in a sexual scenario. So no or stop are actually quite bad ones to choose because a lot of people incorporate those into role play, or they tend to moan no when, actually they mean don't bloody stop now or I'll kill you.
So it needs to be something completely obscure that
yes.
it was completely out of the context.
Yeah, I use the word doorbell because I find that nothing stops someone faster than the idea that someone might be at the door and that person might be their dad. So doorbell's good.
It's a great idea.
Alternatively, you can use the traffic light system, which means you say green if you're happy with things, amber or orange if maybe you need to slow down, you want to reduce the pace a bit, or you need to take a break, you need to check in. Red means I've reached my limit here and you absolutely need to stop, or I'm uncomfortable. Yeah. So safety first. Sane. Sane means that you understand fully what you're getting into. You don't just have a rough idea about it. You have really thought it over. It means that you're sober enough to agree, or that you can consent in full mind, and that you know the person that you're playing with enough to know that they understand all this again. So safe, sane and consensual. You have to make sure that both people really are on the same page and enthusiastic about this. That means a thorough conversation beforehand. It means making sure that you're not accidentally pushing or coercing your partner into doing something with you because they think it's the only way to get you to stay, or they're so desperately wanting to make you happy that they'll do something that makes them feel unhappy. It has to be a genuine desire. And consent is also not just something that you get once and then you've got it for all eternity. It should be negotiated constantly. You should always be checking in with your partner. Are you still feeling happy? Does this feel good? Do you need a break? Make it easy for them to call a little bit of a time out if they need to. I'm all about sex breaks. This is another thing that we don't see in porn or on the telly very much. We're presented images of people having like really intense, sweaty sex sessions. Bang, 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 more than, your average builder. Who always seems to start before 7 a.m. and finish somewhere like 11 in my neighbourhood. my sex life, I wish, was the same.
But he has a tea break, I'm sure.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe we should make sex more like building, constructive and with many tea breaks. But yeah, sex, it's totally fine to pause, catch your breath, check in, have a chat.
It's really interesting.
Then resume play. It doesn't have to be just one block session and then that's that.
How do you communicate that break? I mean, that's what you just say, sorry, let's just take a break.
You don't have to apologise for it. Yeah. You can say, shall we catch our breath, for example? Or you can say, wow, this is really intense. I just want a moment to let this feeling flow through me and share this with you. It doesn't have to be I'm knackered. It can be I want to savour this. Yeah. I want to extend the experience. It can be a sexy thing rather than a cop-out,
Well, it always comes back to communication, doesn't it? And developing those communication skills. I think what you've done in this conversation is given people a lot of tools that they can use rather than just talk about it, just talk and communicate all the time. But having those tools and knowing how to communicate is essentially the core of a positive and constructive sexual relationship, isn't it?
Yeah. I think conversation, communication, and also I think we really need to remember that provided that you're not trying to have a baby, the whole point of sexual interactions is fun. It should be pleasurable. It should be playful. And I think so many people take sex extremely seriously. And yes, it is a very important part of relationships for many people. It's how they bond. It's a form of stress relief and escapism for them. It's intimacy. But I think all of those things, if you infuse them with that central theme of this should be good fun, that will lift your entire sexual experience. I often prescribe to people who come to me for advice who say that, their sex life's gone down the drain or they're getting really stressed out about something. Just pull it back and remember that it's totally fine to laugh and have a giggle. If you found that your sex life has become very fixated around performance, for example, and that you're worried that you're not living up to some ideal of sexual potency that you feel that you should be delivering to your partner, for a start, take penetration off the table, by which I don't mean stop shagging on your kitchen counter. I mean, I think a lot of us feel that when we say sex, what we mean is penetrative sex. And I'm quite famous these days for my phrase, the sole goal shouldn't be putting a pole in a hole when it comes to sex.
Dr. Zeus.
Yeah, I do. I probably wear hats that look like the cat and hat as well. I'm quite an adventurous dresser. I think a lot of people do get hung up on penetrative sex as the best or even only form of what they count as sex. And if you decide not to do that for a while, you could be amazed at how much pressure that takes off and how much more fun you can have. We know that for most women, and I realise that I'm talking a lot about heterosexual sex here, but let's concentrate on that just for this moment. We know that for women, in order for them to have pleasurable sexual experiences, the majority require quite concentrated clitoral stimulation, focused clitoral stimulation. Penetrative sex is terrible at that. It does not get the clit lit. So penetrative sex on its own is often not the greatest form of sex for women. Whereas for men, penetrative sex absolutely depends on them having a hard-on. And that puts really huge pressure on them to gain and maintain an erection, which we know a lot of men stress about. And stress is not good for getting a donk on. Stress is one of the biggest causes of flaccid and floppy penises out there.
Absolutely.
So you can see my point, even if you can't see yours some nights, that penetrative sex isn't always great for either partner. So saying that you're not going to do that for a bit can be a great source of relief.
Take your time, focus on other areas of each other's bodies and your relationship rather than
and remember
going straight for the ultimate goal.
Precisely. Don't just go for that bullseye of the genitals either. I suggest really silly things like having a pillow fight together, or getting in the shower and putting some great music on that makes you feel good, and just having a splish splash dance around. Reconnect with each other's bodies in a way that's playful and joyful again, and it isn't loaded with pressure and stress. I've brought another favourite product of mine along, which that's me shaking it in front of the mic to try and demonstrate that it's a powder called Sloob. Sloob is designed to be sprinkled into a warm bathtub of water or a paddling pool. Hey, summertime right now, it's hot outside. Why the hell not? Terrify those neighbours who are already at their wits' end because of the building work. And the Sloob powder transforms that water into a giant warm vat of coloured flavoured lubricant. In this case, it's pina colada, although I really think it should be penis colada. There are some that are aromatherapy, designed to be relaxing. Some have you can get one that's leather scented, black leather scented, if you're a little bit saucy in that way. And what that does is not only you jump in it, you play around, you can have a little wrestle if you want. It's really sensual. It feels great.
That's a way of sort of uncovering your leather fetish, isn't it?
It can
Just
be,
like,
yeah.
oh, I really like the smell of this. What is it? Oh, it's leather. Oh.
Yeah, it could be. Primarily, Sloob, though, is about bringing that sense of playfulness back. It makes the skin really glossy and gleaming, and it's very sexy to look at. It's two bodies sliding alongside each other. So it's definitely got a lot of sex there, but you can make it you can move it from the mild to the wild side as much as you and your partner both see fit. It can be a crazy bath that makes you both laugh your heads off and kick back for a night, or it can turn into a really quite kinky, memorable, slip-slidey sex experience. I think if more people open their mind to the idea that you can try new things in sex and it doesn't always have to end up in a major orgasm. It can just be something that you've tried and it was okay or it wasn't for you, and then just laugh it off and move on. It doesn't have to be a big deal if you try something and it doesn't work. It's cool.
It is such a big deal with so many people, and taking that pressure off is I could just imagine opening a whole new world of fun, a relaxed fun, taking the stress away. I was going to ask you for your sort of final word and some advice, but I think you've sort of given it right there, really, is to take that pressure off. And so, Alix, it's been amazing speaking to you today. You've given us so many tools to take away, and about communication, about practical elements as well. So thank you ever so much. Have you got any final words you'd like to add?
Yeah, just on that note of positive messages about sex, I hear from a lot of people who feel that because of how they feel about their own bodies, that they're not allowed to enjoy sex right now. Some of them even hold off from having relationships or sexual encounters at all because they don't think they look or feel good enough. Don't wait to enjoy your life, and don't wait to enjoy good sex. It's absolutely fine to work towards a health goal if you want to. There's a lot of people out there trying to get fitter and preserve their health for the future, and that's commendable. But I don't think that people should put their enjoyment of their bodies on hold because they haven't reached a goal. It can be very hard, though, if you don't feel positive about the skin that you're in, to let go in front of another person. And for some people, it's even hard to enjoy your own body through masturbation, if you loathe yourself that much. I'd really like to encourage people to be kind to themselves now, even if you are on a physical journey, if you're trying to change your body. You still have utter permission to feel good right this second. And a lot of people find that when they learn how good their bodies can make them feel, they feel better about their bodies. A few exercises that you can do are, I really recommend that people start masturbating in front of a mirror. Look at yourself, learn to accept you as you are now. If you can see yourself while you feel great, then you might come to accept yourself a little bit more, and maybe even celebrate what amazing things that body you can see is doing for you. Try and say kind things to your body every day. And I know that sounds like hippy dippy, crazy, tree hugging ridiculousness. But if there's a part of your body that you don't like, just thank it for being there. Thank it. Like if you're worried about your chunky thighs, thank them for getting you from A to B. If you're not a fan of your stomach, give it a little hug. My friend Sophie Hagen, who's a brilliant comedian and author of a book called Happy Fat, has really encouraged me to do this with my body lately. And I've really noticed how much more at home I feel in the corporeal home that I occupy. And it's had a great effect upon my sex life. I just think that life is too short not to find joy and not to feel joyful in yourself. And it breaks my heart that some people don't love themselves enough to enjoy lovemaking.
Well, I think that's extremely empowering advice, very poignant. So thank you ever so much. A final word would really be watch Sex Education. It's incredible. Please listen to Unexpected Fluids as well. It's amazing, hilarious. And just keep Googling Alix Fox, seeing what she's up to. Incredible articles coming out all the time. Thank you, Alix. It's an absolute pleasure. And I hope we get to speak to you again at some point.
Cheers, my dears. It's been a treasured pleasure. If anybody would like to ask me a personal question about sex, unfortunately, I don't offer a one-on-one service at the moment, but I am resident sex advisor in a segment called The Foxhole on a podcast called The Modern Man with 2 N's because it's hosted by Ollie Mann. If you head to our website, which is modernman.co.uk, and hit feedback, then you can ask me anything that you're thinking about when it comes to sex, and I'll do my best to answer that on that podcast.
Lovely. Thank you, Alix.
Cheers, my dears.
I hope you enjoyed our conversation with Alix Fox. If you want to hear more about sexual health, check out our interview with Love Island's Dr. Alex George, where we also discuss the mental health implications of reality TV. And if you want to hear more about sexual relationships, check out our sister show, The Healthy Podcast, where editor Ellie Hughes interviews orgasm expert Kate Campbell about the science behind the female orgasm. Thanks ever so much for watching, and see you again.